So just to let everybody know, this meeting is being recorded and it's streaming live on YouTube. So with that, I will go ahead and give initial instructions for interpretation. Buenas tardes a todos. Mi nombre es Domingo Vigil. Para su información, esta reunión está siendo grabada y se va a transmitir en vivo a través de YouTube. Voy a dar instrucciones para la interpretación, tanto en inglés como en español. So if you are an English speaker, please go ahead and click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, which is in the form of a globe, and make sure you select the English channel. That way you will be able to get interpretation for any communication that takes place in Spanish. I will repeat these instructions for our Spanish speakers. Para todas las personas que hablan español, si desean acceder a servicios de interpretación, por favor hagan clic en el globo terráqueo que está abajo, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla de Zoom y elijan el canal de español. De esta manera van a poder escuchar la comunicación que se lleve a cabo en inglés. La van a poder escuchar en español. De ahora en adelante voy a proseguir con la reunión en inglés y van a poder escucharme en el canal de español. So thank you everybody for being with us tonight. We have a very interesting agenda for tonight. We have a couple of presentations. And before we get started, I wanted to go ahead and take a quick roll here for all of our committee members. So I will go ahead and get started. If you can please unmute yourself and say present when I call your name, I would really appreciate it. So first we have Manuela Castañeda.
Sí, soy yo. Acabo de cambiar ahorita mi nombre.
Muchas gracias, Manuela. Olga Espinosa. Olga Espinosa. Wendy Barrientos. Wendy Barrientos. Rudy López.
Present.
Thank you, Rudy. Welcome. Juan Miguel Ornedo.
Present.
Thank you, Juan Miguel. Welcome. Jason Wells. Jason Wells. Margarita González. Margarita González. Mariano Muñoz.
Present.
Thank you, Mariano. Alejandro Amador.
Present.
Thank you, Alejandro. Stanford Morrison.
Present.
Thank you, Stanford. Leslie Gallegos Stearns, I'm sorry.
Presente.
Gracias, Leslie. Dr. Jenny Quintana.
Present.
Thank you, Jenny. Diane Vermeulen. Diane Vermeulen. Shelby Busso. Shelby Busso. Irma Cepeda.
Presente.
Bienvenida, Irma. Muchas gracias. Phil Trump. Phil, are you with us?
Phil's not joining, but as alternate, I'm here. This is Zach Hernandez from San Diego.
Thank you, Zach. Good to have you with us. Christopher Roberts.
Present.
Thank you, Christopher. Janet Gaitan.
Present.
Thank you, Janet. Do we have Laura McDonald? Laura McDonald. Maria Gámez. Maria Gámez. Marie Vicario.
Presente.
Gracias, Marie. Do we have Mauricio Vitela?
Present.
Thank you, Mauricio. Guadalupe Gomez. Guadalupe Gomez. All right, and last but not least, David Flores. David, are you with us tonight? All right. Well, thank you everybody again for being here. I will just make a very quick correction to our agenda tonight. The agenda that we had sent, and it's not so much to the items, it's really to the order of the items. The agenda had first our Community Air Protection Program Path to a Community Emissions Reduction Plan. And then after that, we were going to have a presentation on emissions inventory and a story map. We will go ahead and start with our presentation of an emissions inventory, and after that, we'll go ahead and have the presentation on the path to community emissions reduction plan. And we thought that switching the order would make our objectives a little bit easier to meet, because we're trying to first have a preliminary understanding of the emissions data that we have for the community. And then after that, we can talk about the path to develop a plan to reduce emissions and monitor air quality. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to my colleague from Carb, Jenny Melgo, for the presentation. Jenny, I have your slides. Would you like me to share the slides, and then you can just cue me when you want me to advance, or would you like to share them from your computer?
I can just share it to my computer, and that way I can also share my story maps after that.
Sounds good. Floor is yours,
So,
Jenny. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Oh, it seems like I cannot share. It's disabled.
Are you, Mia, do we have Jenny as a panelist?
Yes, she is a panelist.
Do you know why she's not able to share her screen?
I am.
Or maybe we'll need to make her a co-host.
Yes, I think that would be it.
Okay, so maybe if we can make her a co-host.
Okay. Jenny, let me know if that works.
Okay. It works now. Can you see my screen?
We
Yes.
can see your screen. Thank you, Jenny.
Okay. I'll take it. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jenny Melgo, and I work at the California Air Resources Board in the Community Emission Inventory Group. Last month, I presented a preview of the Community Emission Inventory as part of the AQ 101 presentation. Today, we will go into details of the preliminary emission inventory for the IBC community. I will also demonstrate a new GIS-based story maps tool that we have developed to share and present emissions data. We hope the information we share today and our work together in refining the emission inventory in the next 3 to 4 months will provide you enough information to identify and prioritize emission reduction strategies. Like we did last month, I want to encourage you to ask questions along the way, and you can also drop questions anytime in the chat box, and my colleagues are there to help answer your questions. Before going into more details of the emission inventory, I would like to recap some of the basics from last month's meeting on emission inventory. So what is an emission inventory, and why do we need it? Simply put, an emission inventory is an accounting of emissions from all sources of air pollution in the community. It serves as a fundamental component of any air quality plan. Carb's blueprint calls for the use of emission inventories in the community emission reduction programs, or SERP, to help identify emission sources in the community, establish a baseline emissions, set emission targets and reduction measures, and track emissions reductions. Understanding emission sources and community concerns is the first critical step toward identifying strategies to reduce emissions. An emission inventory estimates the amount, An emission inventory estimates the amount of air pollutants discharged in the atmosphere by the emission sources in a region within a certain time period, like a calendar year. In the case for IBC, we are looking at those emissions for the year 2020 within the community boundary. Emission inventories are developed with the best available data and updated over time to reflect sound science and robust new data. Emission sources are broadly classified into 4 major sources: stationary, area-wide, on-road mobile, and off-road mobile sources, as shown in the pictures on the right. Emissions come from a variety of sources and contribute to both regional air pollution sources like smog and local near source issues like exposure to air toxics like diesel PM. When talking about regional air pollution sources or issues, it's criteria air pollutants that we are referring to. Criteria pollutants are those for which acceptable levels of exposure can be determined and for which national and or state ambient air quality standards have been set. These include the most air pollutants such as ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lead. Some air pollutants like reactive organic gases, or you might know them as volatile organic compounds or VOCs, and ammonia are also important as they help form ozone and PM2.5 in the atmosphere. On a local scale, toxic air contaminants like diesel particulate matter, toxic VOCs like benzene, and metals like hexavalent chromium pose health concerns, especially for people living near sources of these emissions. District and Carb have been working together to develop an emission inventory for the community to help understand existing sources of air pollution and where these occur in the community. As mentioned earlier, emission sources are divided into 4 major sources. Stationary sources are fixed sources of air pollution. For example, power plants, gas stations, manufacturing facilities, and industrial shops or auto body shops. These are the sources that the district oversees. Area-wide sources are those sources spread over a wide geographic area. For example, consumer products like household cleaning products and hairsprays, paint cleanup and thinning solvents or coatings applied to building structures or houses. Both the district and Carb work together to calculate emissions for these categories. On-road mobile sources include any motor vehicles or roadways like passenger cars, trucks, and buses and motorcycles. And finally, off-road mobile sources include small off-road engines and equipment, farm and construction equipment, airplanes and trains. Carbs works on the inventories for both on-road and off-road mobile sources. The preliminary emission inventory for IBC accounts for emissions within the 1 kilometer grid community boundary, as shown in black grids. As you can see on the map, the 1 kilometer grid boundary reflects full grid that expands the community boundary, which is shown on pink polygon. The expanded portion includes Brownfield Municipal Airport on the northern part of Altai Mesa and some slither portion of Imperial Beach Airport on the western part of San Isidro. I want to pause here for a moment to check if everyone is okay for the inclusion of one full grids along the edges of the pink boundary, or do you want to account the final community emissions exactly within the pink boundary or the community boundary?
Can you repeat that one more time, Jenny, please? Thank you.
All right, I want to check if everyone is okay for the inclusion of full grids inventory here along the edges of the pink boundary, or do you want to account the final community emissions exactly within the pink polygon or the community boundary?
Sorry, this is,
Sorry,
no, please go ahead.
this is Jenny Quintana from San Diego State University.
Mhm.
And I'm okay with including the complete grid because the emissions do affect the community. But I did have a question really quick. Is there any plan to do emissions from nearby areas such as Tijuana or not? I think someone last week from Carb said they're working on that. I was curious.
I'm gonna explain that later, but basically in short, it's not really part of our inventory. And because it is in Mexico, but we do have some Mexico emission inventory for Tijuana and Tecate, and it's still under QA/QC from our modeling folks, and also needs to be verified as well. But yeah, we can talk on that one. I will touch base on that one later on.
Okay, sorry. And my last question was, you said the year 2020, did I hear that correctly?
Yes, correct. Year
But that's
2020.
the COVID shutdown year, so it seems like it would underestimate emissions if you focus on 2020.
Mm,
You know, because I mean, it's not very a normal year. I mean,
Right.
2019 seems like it'd be better.
I guess I would call Sharanya. Sharanya, are you there? I guess for the emission estimate, we do have a set of methodology. So this is not just like a real time like an air monitoring concentration. So it's an annual total emissions, and it's based on the approved methodology that we use at Carb. But I can
Yeah.
Here's Sharanya.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Hi, everybody. This is Sharanya Vardarajan from Carb. I'm Jenny's manager. So the reason why we use 2020 for the inventory is because that's the guidance for the 617 communities on which year we select for AB 617 base year. But Professor Jenny, I want to kind of acknowledge that what you're raising is a very good point. So we can definitely take a look at 2019 if everybody is okay with it. I don't think it should be a problem at all. But as Jenny said, I don't think there should be a lot of variability. The variability would probably occur in the stationary source emissions, which for this preliminary inventory, we are anyway using 2019 and not 2020 because we didn't have the 2020 data when we developed this. As far as on-road mobile and other, I'm sure there's probably some VMT reduction, so that could probably change. So we're more than happy to take a look at 2019 and we can loop back with Domingo and our OCAP folks, like the Office of Community Air Protection folks, who have the blueprint guidance for which year to select for the base year and future year, and we can definitely accommodate it. I really don't think 20 should be an issue, but we can get back to you on that. Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
And I have a couple of questions. I know Alejandro has his hand up, and we also had another team member have with his hand up. I believe that was Mariano. So Alejandro, can you, if you can please unmute yourself and.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that I also I would agree to using the grid community boundary. And I also wanted to mention the whole 2019 versus 2020, but it seems that we're going to be looking at both, if I heard correctly.
What was that again, Alejandro? Can you repeat it?
that from the 2019 versus the 2020 data, we're going to be looking at both and have further discussion in another
Yeah.
meeting?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's right, Alejandro. I think, because we already did the 2020, so we have it on hand. So we can definitely go back and do 2019 and then, share the information with you guys so we can take a look and see how different it is.
All right, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, Alejandro. And I see that Mariano already shared on the chat that he would support using the grid as well. And also, let me see, he's saying that he would also support checking previous year's data. We also have a comment from Marie Vicario that supporting the full grid approach as well. And same with Olga Espinosa. And we also have support from Stan Morrison.
All right. You want me to move on already, Domingo?
Yeah, we can continue to hear from our community through the chat if they agree with the support, and then just in the interest of time, maybe you can proceed with the rest of the slides. Thank you, Jenny.
All right. So we look at this summary table at last month's meeting as well. To recap, the table shows the total emissions for each pollutant and source category within the 1K grid community boundary. You can see that mobile sources, especially off-road mobile, are the primary contributors to NOx and diesel PM emissions, while stationary and area-wide sources contribute to the ROG and PM 2.5 emissions. In the following slide, I will share more information about each of these source categories. Now that you are familiar for our
Jenny,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Could you please go back to the previous slide?
Mhm.
I just wanted to pause here a little bit just to highlight what, and I guess to ask and highlight for everybody what would be the highest contributors for the different contaminants. So we can see, we have the NOx, ROG, PM, and diesel particulate matter. So if you could highlight for us.
Oh, so do you do that? Okay, for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, Jenny, so Domingo is asking you to kind of give a summary of the results we have in the table, right? So we say that for NOx, the majority of the emissions are coming from off-road mobile. That's an yeah, something like that. So can you kind of highlight it a little bit?
Right. Okay, so as I mentioned a while ago, so it's the off-road mobile sources. Basically, the mobile sources contribute the NOx and DPM emissions, specifically the off-road mobile, as you can see in this slides here. And then for ROG and PM 2.5, you can see it's area-wide, and then it's mostly area-wide, and for ROG and PM 2.5 that contribute the most emissions for that, and followed with the stationary sources.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And everybody, like, in the next few slides, you may have already seen it. Jenny's gonna go into some of the details to show within each of these source categories, which are some of the activities that contribute the most. So you'll get to see that information as well in the upcoming slides.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna move on. So just give you a brief an introduction overview of the grid, our approach. So the community emission inventories, we are allocating emissions to a 1 by 1 kilometer grid to allow better characterization of sources and emissions. Emissions from stationary sources are allocated to the grids using source location data. County level emissions from area-wide and off-road mobile sources are allocated to the grids using spatial surrogates such as population, off-road construction locations, and off-road mobile source emissions are calculated using vehicle miles traveled within each grid. So as for the stationary sources, districts collects and submit facility or point emissions to Carb emission inventory reporting system for permitted facility. However, there are some small facilities such as the mom and pop gas stations and dry cleaners that are not inventoried individually, but are estimated as a group. Carb helps the district estimate emissions from those small facilities, or known as stationary aggregate. Together, emissions from both point sources and stationary aggregate represent stationary sources. Trying to, hold a second, let me try to remove this. Okay, so this slide shows the stationary source emissions in the community. As you can see, fuel combustions related sources contribute largely to the nitrogen oxides, NOx for short, particulate matter 2.5 microns or smaller, or PM 2.5 for short, and diesel particulate matter emissions, or DPM. Petroleum marketing or gas stations account for 38% of reactive organic gases emissions, or ROG for short, followed with coatings and related process solvents like auto refinishings or body shops. The map shows how the stationary source ROG emissions are distributed in the community. Highest ROG emissions from stationary sources, shown in dark colored grids, are located around industrial areas adjacent to major road in Otay Mesa and parts of San Isidro that are adjacent to large freeways. I will pause for a moment here to hear if you have some questions or to hear your feedbacks as well.
Yeah, Jenny, quick question. Of the emissions listed here, what's the most harmful or the biggest ticket item for Carb to reduce?
That's kind of, yeah. So it's for the community. Sharanya, you can back me up on this, but everything it's like relevant, because it's harmful, as I mentioned in the previous slide, that's very harmful to human health. But for the community that are living close to a sources or emission sources, like for example, to a facility or roads, it's very, it really affects or affects to the human health as well. Like I would say the DPM. So it has a local near source impact to the public.
Understood.
Yeah.
And that's because of the carcinogenic effect that it has, correct, on the local community?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. I think that's the right answer. So Carb is responsible for reducing mobile source related emissions. So a lot of our regulations are focused on reducing emissions from on-road and off-road vehicles, and we have a bunch of regulations that were recently adopted that bring down the diesel PM emissions from trucks, right? And then we have a couple of new regulations that are coming up, like Advanced Clean Car, that are cleaning up the light duty vehicles. And a whole new bunch of regulations focused on transport refrigeration units, small off-road engines, which are like lawn and garden equipment, and more stringent regulations for trucks that will eventually reduce diesel PM considerably, which we've been doing this work for a while now, right, with the truck and bus rule and everything. So the diesel PM has been cleaned up quite a bit, but with all the upcoming regulations, we can expect that the mobile source related NOx, PM 2.5, ROG, and diesel PM emissions would significantly reduce as well and will benefit all communities across the state.
If I may, I'd like to also just add a quick comment about the work that APCD has been doing with stationary sources. We have our hotspots program, and with that program, all the stationary sources that were regulated under that program, we used to have our our risk reduction threshold be 100 in a million for cancer risk. And that has been recently revised to reduce it to 10 in a million risk reduction threshold for those facilities. So that's also something that that benefits the entire region, not just this community, but something recent that was an important development in reducing risk from cancer risk reduction.
I guess for the side, that's a cue for me to move on.
Sounds good.
Okay. So for area-wide sources, both Carb and the district calculate emission using approved methodologies for each category at the county level. These sources include consumer products, fugitive dust from roads construction, and residential fuel combustions. An example of residential fuel combustions includes the use of fireplaces and water heaters at home. So if you're interested to know more about these methodologies, please visit the website listed here. Okay, this slide shows the area-wide source categories contributing to each pollutant emissions in the community. Residential fuel combustions contribute most of the NOx emissions. Fugitive dust from construction and demolition contribute largely toward PM 2.5 emissions. And lastly, emissions from consumer products contribute half of the ROG emissions, followed by architectural coatings and process solvents and asphalt paving. The map shows the distribution of area ROG emissions in the community. Dark colored grids or high ROG emissions follow along the residential areas in San Isidro due to the emissions from the consumer products, and industrial areas in Altai Mesa, which could be associated from the coatings and the greasing solutions. One important note I want to emphasize here is that some of our area source methods to estimate emissions are outdated and use older input data, especially PM emissions related to construction dust that might be overestimated for the community in this preliminary draft. We are in the process of identifying newer data sources to update and better represent these emissions in the final inventory. Again, I'm going to pause here for any questions that you might have for area-wide source emissions. I guess there's a cue for me. I'll go ahead and continue.
Actually, we do have a question from Marie Victario.
I just was a little confused about the data presented. So in the previous slide, it mentioned that the point source was from 2019. And this doesn't actually show where the data came from. And I'm assuming this is the 2020 data that was referenced earlier?
Correct. So these are 2020 data emissions. Basically, this has a base year of 2017 and was projected to 2020 emissions. As what mentioned Sharanya a while ago, that it is based on the SERP guidance for this community that we're gonna use 2020. But if it has been suggested a while ago that we're gonna use 2020, then we're gonna discuss that further with you guys to confirm that we're gonna go to that route of using 2019. But for now, we're showing 2020 emissions, except for the point source. Basically, those emissions from the facilities where we were using 2019, because at that time we created this preliminary. It was the most and the latest data that are available in the CEDARS group, or in the CEDARS database.
Well, and so that makes sense that we would want to, even more reason to want to use the 2019 data for the non-point source as well, so that we're looking at both of those categories equivalently.
Right. We just got a note from the CEDARS database already last week that the 2020 point source emissions just came out. It was done through a lot of QA/QC, and it's already available in the public. So since they told us, I was thinking actually to update our point source emissions here with 2020, but if the group wants 2019, we can do that as well.
Just a quick point of clarification. When you talk about QA, QC, that's referencing quality assurance and quality control. So that's basically a validation of the data. I see that we also have a question from Mariano on the chat. He's curious if there's any filtering on the data when averaging hourly, weekly, or monthly measurements to differentiate stationary versus mobile sources outside of the registered inventory of locations. I don't think we have the ability to do that with this information, but Janie or Sharania, please correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think we can do that because I think we included everything. I mean, all the on-road mobile sources, off-road mobile sources, stationary and area-wide sources as well. So,
right, and we don't have the averages correct for.
No, we don't. Yeah, it's
right.
This is total annual emissions.
Correct.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. And I don't see any other questions at the moment, so you can go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, thank you, Domingo. All right, Carb for off-road mobile sources, Carb calculates emissions using approved methodologies for off-road mobile sources using activity data and emission factors. Activity data is collected from reported emissions, reported information, my bad, survey results and purchase data. Carb methodologies for off-road can be found on the website listed here. So last month, we asked you questions regarding air pollution sources of concerns in the community. A few sources were brought up, such as aircraft emissions from the Tijuana Airport and the Brownfield Airport, and freight train passing the community. We look into this due to its location in Mexico. Tijuana Airport is not part of our inventory. However, based on a research project, we had to look at emissions from Mexico. So we do have a 2017 emission inventory data for Tijuana and Tecate provinces, which I will share later on in the presentation. So back to the community, aircraft emissions, which includes those from the Brownfield Airport and off-road equipment sources, contribute to the highest NOx, ROG, PM2.5 emissions. Off-road equipment such as construction, lawn and garden, airport ground support equipment, and transport refrigeration unit contribute most of the DPM emissions in the community. The map shows how the off-road mobile DPM emissions are distributed in the community. As you can see, the DPM emissions are heavily concentrated in areas adjacent to major roads, like at 905, 125, 805, and I-5. From the northern portion down to the border crossing both in San Isidro and Otay Mesa. Again, I'm gonna pause here for feedbacks.
This is Jenny Quintana. I had a quick question if I could.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this is, I just want to clarify what off-road means. I'm not exactly sure. So trucks that are going back and forth along the border, kind of short distance, heavy duty trucks, those are on road, right?
Yeah, correct. Those are on road. Sorry, and
then the other question is, trucks that are lined up waiting to cross the border on the other side are on road, but they're not captured in the emission inventory. But what would be off-road equipment with the Border Patrol driving along dirt roads? Would that be off-road, counted as off-road emissions, for example?
Yeah, the Border Patrol, like any related emission associated from them, we don't have a good handle of their emissions actually. Like for example, the example of the off-road mobile sources, the the emissions here from the Naval Field Imperial Beach Airport. So that is of course, military base. So we don't have a good handle of emissions for those sources. So yeah, but for the off-road, I think your question was about off-road mobile equipment,
I just
right?
wasn't sure what was counted. Sorry, I'm not really familiar with exactly the definition. So I wasn't sure about like the other bases. So
I
can add on to that.
Yeah, go ahead, Alejandra.
Hi guys, my name is Alejandra. I work in the same section as Jenny does. So when we talk about off-road mobile sources, we're pretty much trying to cover all of those sources that are not on-road mobile sources. So meaning those vehicles that are driving on the road every day, those are still under on-road sources. So for off-road, we're talking more like your boats, and I mean, not particular to this community, it would be, you know, your lawn and garden equipment, your construction equipment, your mining equipment, if there's any ATVs in the area. Does that add on more information on your question?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about that, the Border Patrol activities with ATVs and other things, if those are captured by the off-road as well, but I think that was partly answered by Jenny. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Also, potentially agricultural equipment.
Yes, correct.
Yes, that would also fall under that.
Yeah,
so,
correct.
So any vehicle pretty much that's not on the road, on like neighborhood streets, it would fall under off-road equipment,
correct.
Off-road mobile sources.
Thanks, Alejandra.
And then we have another question on the chat from Nick Cormier. What emission inventory database does Carb utilize to get DPM data for mobile sources?
Right. We do have, and for on-road, we do have the NFAC or emission inventory, emission factor model. That's we use for the NFAC for the on-road mobile sources. So, and then for the off-road mobile sources, we do purchase some of the data that could, like, you know, purchase data that account for the activity for each of the off-road mobile sources. And then we apply that with an emission factors to come up with an emissions for each of the off-road mobile source categories. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I don't see any other questions on the queue, so you can go ahead, Jenny.
All right. So our last category is on-road mobile sources, which include cars, trucks, buses, and other vehicles that we see traveling on our roads. We estimate these emissions using the road level vehicle activity data from the Regional Metropolitan Planning Organization, in this case, San Diego Association of Governments, or SANDAG in short, and the Vehicle Distribution and Emission Factors CARB's On-Road Mobile Source Emission Factors Model, or NFAC for short. So as you can see from these results here, light duty vehicles like passenger cars that you and me typically drive contribute the most NOx, ROG, and PM2.5 emissions. Altogether, heavy-duty vehicles such as heavy, light heavy, and medium heavy-duty trucks contribute the majority of DPM emissions in the community. As we all expected, and was also brought up in the last meeting, that the highest on-road mobile DPM emissions distinctly follow 805 freeway in San Isidro and 905 and 125 freeways in Otay Mesa, where trucks moving goods pass through in and out of the border crossing. Again, I'm going to stop here for any feedbacks.
And Mariano had a question in the chat about whether the nearby landfill falls within the grid map, which if you're, Mariano, if you're referring to Republic Services in South Chula Vista, I don't believe that's captured in the grid. And that would actually be considered stationary source. Any questions from anybody else or comments on this?
I do kind of want to jump in, Domingo. I just want to briefly mention that Sandag actually published a research effort in early 2021 that basically quantified both the economic impact and the air quality impacts of delays at the border. So just to mention that really quickly, there is a piece of data. It's a snapshot in time. It's not a kind of a rolling data set that we can get fresh stuff from just by looking at it. But I think the base year in that is 2016. And just for what it's worth, we can provide that and kind of point out where to look for the air quality data that may be pertinent to at least try to match up the San Ysidro and Otay Mesa port of entry, for which this study does have data for. But just to mention that.
Oh, thank you, Zach. That's very helpful. Would you be able to provide a link to it on the chat?
Will do. Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. I don't think I see any other hands up. So Jenny, you can go ahead.
All right. So in the previous slides, we saw the results for individual source categories. The 4 maps here shows the added 2020 total emissions for all source categories for each 1K grid in the community. From these maps, we can get a sense how NOx, ROG, PM2.5, and DPM total emissions are distributed throughout the communities. Do these results align with your understandings of the issues in the community? Just wondering. So I guess I'm gonna pause here for some feedback.
And Jenny, could you please repeat the question again?
So I'm just wondering, with the distribution right now, that what you're seeing on the maps by emissions by pollutants as well, I'm just wondering if this is what the community had expected or what they understand the issues in the community. Like, for example, right now for ROG, as I don't know if you can see my mouse is moving here. So when I was looking at the Google Earth, there's a lot of residential houses here. And I would say that a lot of those consumer products emits, ROG emissions. And that makes a lot of sense why there's more ROGs here compared to the other areas. And also here, there's a lot of industrial areas as well here. And that could be related, like, using of coatings and solvents or degreasing solutions as well. And then for DPM, as I mentioned a while ago, it's mainly contributed by the mobile sources. You can see it's been following this corridor here. This is 905 freeway. And then I guess this is, I forgot what freeway was this, but so yeah, it's mainly here. And then as well as PM 2.5 and NOx too. So yeah. So I wanted to get feedback for the community if these are what's being colored, what have been highlighted as dark colored grids here is what they expect, where the emissions are mostly occurring within the community.
Thank you, Jenny. I see we have Manuela Castañeda with her hand up. Manuela, if you can unmute yourself and share your comment.
Sí, buenas tardes. Sobre el inventario preliminar de emisores, ¿esto es para ambas fronteras o solamente es para Estados Unidos? No me quedó muy claro esa pregunta.
Thank you, Manuela, and I think I can answer the question. This is
Gracias.
right now the emissions inventory that you're seeing is only for the U.S. Side. Es solamente para el lado de Estados Unidos.
And
Gracias.
I can add on to that. Jenny will go over a little bit more for Tijuana in a little bit, and it's just going to be an overview for them, for Tijuana and Tecate.
Right. Thank you, Alejandra. I also see Jenny has her hand up.
Hi, it sounds like you're going to address this later, but you asked if the community was surprised by the results, and I'm not a residing member of the community, but I have been taking air measurements, for example, for black carbon, which is related to diesel particulate matter, or DPM. And we definitely, and one of the spots is in that yellow area to the left at the estuary, Tijuana Estuary Visitor Center, and finding very, very high values overnight over there, as well as in the city of San Isidro. So I guess it's hard to use these for priority when they don't take into account, like the previous speaker said, sources on both sides of the border. It's hard to, be nice to put them all in a big pot and see where the really big emissions are, you know.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
So Jenny,
yeah, Sharania, go ahead.
Go on, Domingo. I can go after you.
No, thank you. I was just going to share very briefly that we also have data from our monitoring station at Donovan, and we're measuring black carbon. And black carbon is a surrogate for particulate matter. And I think that from what I can tell on the grid cells there, that area is kind of like a light orange, yellowish, but we know that we're getting pretty high readings on that site. So I was a little bit surprised by that too. The other thing I was just going to quickly mention is that we will soon be bringing information back to this group on some data that we have with our monitoring stations. So just be stay tuned for that.
Right. So yeah, I just want to add something on this one. So this is emission inventory. So these are the emissions that coming out from the sources as well, and it's based on, as I mentioned a while ago, it's annual total emissions. So what you are referring might be a air monitoring data that is based on concentration. So it's kind of hard to kind of compare two data sets as well. Sharanya, okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just going to jump in really quick because it's been brought up a couple times, and I know that we have a slide on it later at the end of this presentation. But hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Venasek. I'm in the atmospheric modeling and support section here at Carb, and I help work on developing the emissions inventory that we use for the Mexico side in our modeling efforts. And so we do have estimates for Tijuana and Tecate and other municipalities throughout Mexico that we use in our modeling efforts, including estimates at border crossings. And so those are preliminary. We have been doing a lot of QA/QC with them just to really understand the inventory. And so what Jenny's showing right here is just the California side, but we do have data that we can have for Tijuana and Tecate.
Sharanya, you want to add something?
No, I'm good, Jenny.
Okay.
I think everybody else covered everything. I was just kind of trying to emphasize that this is annual average emission inventory data. These are emissions and not actually air quality measured concentrations. So definitely, there is a relation between the two, but you really cannot look at emissions and figure out where the impacts from air quality are coming from. And as you rightly said, Jenny, that without understanding what's coming from the Mexico side, it may be difficult for you to prioritize, but these are the sources that are within our control to actually reduce emissions within the United States and in California. So this inventory is representative of what emissions that we have control over. And as Melissa just mentioned, we have like the a slightly older data set from the 2014 Mexico National Emission Inventory, which our modeling folks have been using for air quality modeling purposes. So we do have that information, so we can definitely take a look at it. Not sure what the timeline would be, but we definitely will have some data to look at and see if what you're saying related to that estuary over there and how our emissions data are capturing that particular piece within, when we use the Mexico inventory.
Thanks, Sharanya. So would there be a cue for me to move on?
I'm sorry, I think we have another question from Irma Cepeda. Irma, you can go ahead and unmute and share your comment.
Ay, una disculpa. Sí, una disculpa. Yo también estaba pensando que mientras no se haga el cruce de carros más rápido, el monóxido de carbono va a seguir creciendo porque las líneas son grandísimas. Este fin de semana me tocó ir a Tijuana y hice 4 horas de línea. Todo ese monóxido de carbono es lo que estamos absorbiendo nosotros aquí en San Isidro. O sea que tenemos que trabajar pues también con las autoridades de migración, porque mientras ellos no apresuren la línea, va siguiendo el monóxido de carbono, nos está afectando tanto a Tijuana como aquí a los que vivimos en San Isidro. Ok, gracias, es nomás era una sugerencia. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Irma. I'm going to respond to Irma's comment in Spanish. Irma, muchas gracias por su comentario. De hecho, tenemos planeado invitar a estas reuniones a nuestros colegas del lado mexicano. Nos reunimos ya con ellos en otra plataforma que es a través de un programa de la EPA en la que tenemos reuniones cada trimestralmente. Pero los vamos a invitar a que formen parte de este grupo también para tener un poco más de información y al mismo tiempo trabajar con agencias del cruce fronterizo para abordar algunas de las preocupaciones que usted está señalando. Así que muchas gracias por su comentario. Thank you. Jenny, I don't see anybody else on the, with their hand up, so you can go ahead.
All right. So here we are showing an overview of 2020 toxic air contaminants, or TACs for short, for IBC community. To relatively compare toxic emissions, we have calculated toxicity weighted emissions, or TWEs, using approved cancer risk health values. Please note that the TWEs are not risks, but weighted emissions useful to rank relative toxicity of TACs. The left chart shows the overall toxicity of TACs for all sources in the community. As you can see, diesel PM has the highest toxic weighted emissions, and it's mostly coming from mobile sources. The charts on the right show cancer risk-based toxicity weighted emissions for mobile sources and for stationary and area-wide sources. So on the upper right chart, between off-road and on-road mobile sources, 73% of DPM are largely emitted from the off-road mobile sources, while on the stationary and area-wide sources shown on the bottom right chart, we found cobalt came as the most prevalent TAC, mainly associated with fugitive dust emissions from construction activities. Now here, I want to caveat that our current emissions calculations methods and data used for estimating fugitive dust in PM emissions from construction and associated toxics are outdated. So this is something that we will be looking at to refine as we finalize in the inventory in the next 3 to 4 months. So I guess I'm going to pause again for feedback, if there are some.
Thank you, Jenny. Any questions or comments from anybody about the information, whether it's something that you would like to go over in more detail or any clarifications? I see a comment from David Flores. David, if you can unmute yourself and share your comment.
Yeah, hi, good evening. I just, so again, sorry, because I think I missed it. This is information for, the state, or is this the localized information, local information?
This is for the community, David, based on the International San Diego Border Community.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Should I go ahead, Domingo?
Yes, I don't see any other hands up, so you can continue, Jenny. Thanks.
Yeah. So as required by the blueprint, we are currently developing projected future emissions for the IBC to support CSC members in the development of SERP. As a start, this slide shows the preliminary emissions trends for the IBC community. So we can get a general idea of how emission totals are projected to change due to adopted CARB and district rules and regulations. Stationary source NOx and PM 2.5 emissions are decreasing due to existing district regulations. ROG and PM 2.5 emission trends are slightly increasing, specifically from the area-wide sources. This could be due to future growth assumptions like increasing population that increase the use of personal products and other consumer products relating to coatings, paints, and cleaning solvents, and fugitive dust related from increasing construction activities from new residential and commercial builds. Emissions from mobile sources show significant decrease from many adopted CARB regulations like truck and bus and advanced clean truck regulations. Please note that the charts here do not yet reflect emissions reductions from some of the recently adopted CARB regulations like the transport refrigeration units and small off-road engine regulations. We will be including these emissions as we finalize our inventory. Additionally, CARB has several mobile source regulations in the works that further decrease mobile source related NOx, ROG, PM 2.5, and DPL emissions in the community. So this chart focuses on the diesel PM emission trends for on-road mobile sources for the entire San Diego Air Basin. As you can see, there will be significant reductions in the future DPM emissions from on-road mobile sources due to the implementation of CARB's adopted mobile source regulations. CARB has several mobile source regulations under rulemaking that will further decrease diesel PM emissions in the San Diego Air Basin. So in summary, the overall air pollution sources in the communities varies with pollutants as shown on the pie charts here. As you can see, mobile sources, specifically off-road mobile sources such as aircraft and off-road equipment, contribute the highest NOx and DPM emissions. Area-wide, like fugitive dust, and stationary sources such as fuel combustion-related processes contribute most of the ROG and PM 2.5 emissions in the community. So what I mentioned here is that we are discussing a preliminary inventory, and our goal is to get your feedback on what we present today. And if we have missed something, and then we'll continue working with you and the district over the next couple of months to finalize the emission inventory. So I'll have to pause for any questions here before I'm going to move to the story maps too. And also, Domingo, do we still have time? I'm looking at the time too.
Yes, I think we're still good on time.
Okay. So I'm pausing here for questions if they have. I guess not. So I'm going to go ahead, move on. All right. So now I want to show our new GIS-based story maps tool to present and share emission inventory data. As you will see, we have tried to make this tool to be more interactive, user-friendly. It includes Spanish language, also can be accessible in multiple web browser, and it is mobile device friendly. We're also trying to include a data download option in multiple formats. So without further ado, let me show you our story map tool. Let me check. Domingo, can you please confirm if you can see the web?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's up. Thank you.
Okay. So this is the community emission inventory story map tool landing page. What you see here is an intro explaining the purpose of this application, which is to display community scale emission inventory for AB 617 community. So we also have 3 main cards here for FAQ and tutorials. So it helps user to learn how to navigate our application tool. And then the emission summary, these are the section or a portion of the story maps that show community inventory result in a PDF format too. And lastly, a card for story maps and data access that allow users to navigate our community inventory data interactively. So scrolling down, we have a section here for users to submit their feedback about their user experience on the platform, any questions they have about the data. And we also have a section here that hyperlinks to each of the district AB 617 web pages. So when going up again, scrolling up again, so when we click on the story maps and data access, this will take us to a new page displaying the IBC story map application. We have story maps for other communities, but it's currently locked or only accessible to its respective community and district group as they are still in review. Therefore, this group has only access to the IBC Story Maps app. So scrolling down, we have a dashboard showing the community forecasted emission summary, which I'll come back in a few minutes. And also scrolling further down, we do have hyperlinks to other Carb resources and tools again on how to navigate this story map. Then as I scroll up and select on the IBC story map, so this will take us to the cover page of the IBC story map. So this story map is structured into 3 main components: background, community, and emission inventory. Each of these components is designed interactively that allow users to quickly navigate to any parts of the story map section. So back to the background gives information on what emission inventory is, the air pollutants and their possible health impacts, a brief description of emission sources, and the importance of emission inventory in the air quality management. The next component, as I mentioned, is a community profile that briefly informs users about the community location, size, and pollutants of concern. We also have a section, an interactive map section here displaying the location of schools, daycares, and hospitals, and the nearby emission sources such as roads and facilities. And the last component is the emission inventory mapping application. It is an application that displays baseline emissions by sources and where is it occurring in the community. So as you can see, a user is greeted with a splash screen, which gives some instructions on how to use the maps. Once you select an OK button, the user can start interacting with the map. So the emission inventory mapping application has 6 interactive tabs. Overall tabs, which showing the community-wide total emissions, and a separate tab for each of the 4 major source categories: area-wide, stationary, area-wide, on-road mobile, and off-road mobile sources. And we also have a tab for the toxics overview. So all of these tabs, except for the toxics overview, have a consistent layout. A left panel with a list of feature layers, a map section showing the emissions at 1 kilometer square grids. You can also select a grid here and a window, a window will pop up showing the emission for that grid and the breakdown of emission by sources. So we also have several mapping widgets on the map section to help the user navigate the map. So like for example, the search button where a user can search for place, like for example, say brown, and if it pops, okay, here, so take it to the area. And we also have a measure tool that allow user to measure distance between maybe between the sensitive receptor like school or daycares to its nearby roads or facilities. And we also have other mapping widgets here that helps user to navigate the map section too. So the right panel that shows the total emissions for some of the key pollutants. So yeah. So when you select the Community Toxics Overview tab, again, this will show display in pie charts emissions of toxics, either by flat or mass emissions, and toxicity weighted emissions based on cancer risk, non-cancer chronic risk, and non-cancer acute cancer risk. As you saw earlier, we also have a dashboard displaying forecasted emissions by community, pollutant, major source category, and year. So by selecting here, by selecting IBC here, criteria pollutants, and maybe diesel PM, you'll see the values on the charts get populated, showing displaying projected future year emissions for 5 and 10 years from when the SERP is adopted. So to further enable accessibility and transparency, we also provide a Spanish version of our story map tools. We also have a way for user to search and download data. Like for example here. So yeah, you can download data here by clicking on this button. You can even share this information. You can bookmark. You can share this information to somebody else or embed it to your own mapping application too. And within this window, our mapping app here, you can select that grid. It will show all the information related emission information for that grid. Or you can also toggle the table here and you see all the data for that feature grid. So we will share the link to the tool to you all so you can explore the preliminary emission inventory. We will greatly appreciate any feedback you can offer to further improve this tool and make it useful for you to better understand emissions in your community and support your needs to identify emissions reduction priorities during the SERP process. So I'll pause here for a moment before I'm gonna show the last slide. So I guess I'll move ahead. Second. Can you see my slides again?
Yes, they're up.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned a while ago, so this is what we have for, Carb staff have on the emissions from Mexico, as there was some interest on this topic at the last meeting. So for some of, I know Melissa already mentioned some of this a while ago, but air quality modeling, they have developed this 2017 emissions inventory 41 Antiquati, Mexico. And it's using the 2014 National Emission Inventory, or MNEI for short. So for most of the categories, the 2014 emissions were projected to 2017, but a few categories, additional improvements were made by ground truthing agricultural burning bird counts, and improving methods to calculate idling mobile emissions at the border entries as part of a research contract. We will also share the 27 final report from ERG with you, I guess, today, right, Melissa? Is that possible, Melissa?
Yes, I can definitely share that. And just to expand a little bit on the inventory used, it was based on the 2014 Mexico National Emissions Inventory, which is originally developed by Semarnet. And then ERG, our contractors, did some ground truthing and investigations in 2019 to help improve that inventory for use in modeling applications. And so that's what we're currently using, as it's the most comprehensive inventory that we can use for modeling. But as always, inventories are just a snapshot, just because in parallel, other researchers are working to improve their methodologies. And so that's what we currently have as of right now.
Right. So just to end it up, like as you can see, in Tijuana, Anticate region, on-road mobile sources contribute majority of the NOx emissions. Area sources contribute most of the total organic gases, or TOG for short. And both on-road and off-road mobile sources largely contribute to the DPM emissions. And for PM 2.5, area, off-road, and on-road mobile sources somewhat uniformly contribute PM 2.5 emissions for those two regions. And yeah, that's as I mentioned, just to add one last note as well, this data is still been verified by the I'm still going through a quality checks with the modelers as well, and it's currently older based on the 2014 base year. So I guess that's the end of our presentations, and we're still here to accept some feedback or questions that you may have.
Jenny, thank you very much for the presentation and for all the work that went behind not just the presentation, but putting all this information together. And all the story map tool looks amazing, and I think it will be very helpful tool for the community to better understand the emissions in their community, and also have better information to work together on the strategies to reduce emissions. I see a question from Christopher Roberts. Christopher, if you can unmute yourself and share your comment.
Yes, thank you. Looking at the map, I don't know if everyone on the panel knows, but in Otay Mesa, we have the commercial port of entry for commercial Class A trucks. 99.9% of them are diesel trucks. And I guess it's a little concerning to me, and I'm only making this comment, and maybe I'm overstepping the bounds of this meeting here, but I need to make it since I have the APCD and Carb present. Why are natural gas trucks being excluded from Carb regulations going forward, and the zero emission vehicle regulations going forward, when they would play an essential role in reducing that diesel particulate matter?
I would call on Sharanya. Do you mind, Sharanya, answering that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jenny. Yeah.
Thanks, Sharanya.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question, because a lot of that work is done by our regulatory teams. So we can definitely follow up with them and get back to you if that's okay with you.
Yeah, please, because I also noticed a disconnect between the local air pollution control districts and even the Port of Long Beach. Port of Long Beach pushing natural gas trucks, the APCD still awarding grant money for natural gas trucks or infrastructure, whereas the laws that Carb is pushing right now seem to completely exclude those from a niche client base that needs that range that electric can't offer right now, and hydrogen is too expensive at the moment to do, where you're paying $15 per kilogram of hydrogen gas, which is the equivalent of a gasoline gallon.
Yeah, we'll surely get back to you. Thank you, Christopher, on that. And you can. We'll connect you with the regulatory teams that actually take the regulations on zero emission vehicles and the and natural gas trucks. So we can definitely get back to you on that. Thank you.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I just add? I think, Jenny, you had a graph earlier in the presentation that kind of showed where our emissions, our projected emissions based on carb regs. Here it is. And Christopher, I definitely get your point that natural gas and low NOx vehicles and the transition to those in between, you know, the transition to full zero emission, that they would bring reductions in diesel PM right now sooner, right? But I think that this brings this graph right here, it really helps show where we're going to see emissions reductions in the future with the carb regs as you described them right now. So, but thanks, we'll still put you in touch with our regulatory team.
Yeah, would you mind dropping your email? That way we can email you with answers as well, or connect with you, the regulatory team, on the chat box.
All right, thank you so much. I know we have another presentation to go over, but before that, any last questions or comments from anybody? All right, thank you very much again, Jenny. So now moving on to our presentation on a path to community emissions reduction plan. I'll turn it over to our colleague, Andrea Juarez from Carb. Andrea, are you able to share your slides?
Actually, do you mind sharing the slides, and I'll just let you know when to move on to the next?
Do I have your presentation? I'm not sure that I have your presentation.
Let me see. I did send it over, but if not,
let me look very quickly. I think we have the videos that you shared.
Here, let me send it to you.
Oh, here it is. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I got
Okay.
it. Thank you. I'll pull it up right now. All right, so just give me 1 second. I'll share my screen. I believe this is it. All right, can everybody see the presentation?
Okay,
Is it up?
thank you.
Okay, so just cue me when you need me to advance to the following slide.
Okay, perfect. Okay, hi everyone. My name is Andrea Juarez, and I am one of your CARB liaisons. Last month at your Community Steering Committee meeting, our team provided an overview on Air Quality 101. And tonight you just heard from Jenny about the draft emissions inventory for your community. Also last week, you received from the Air District a link to some training videos on the AB 617 program. And those videos touch on how a community emissions reduction plan is developed. So tonight, I'll be going over this process. And if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please feel free to enter it into the chat. Next slide. Okay, so the International Border Community was selected to develop both a community emissions reduction plan and a community air monitoring plan. And both of these plans need to meet minimum requirements, and this criteria is detailed in the Community Air Protection Blueprint. The blueprint covers community selection, it covers new statewide strategies, and criteria for community air monitoring and emissions reduction plans. It is the roadmap for how we focus air quality improvement at the community scale, and it's intended to be a resource to help communities understand the community selection process. So today we will be discussing the path to a community emissions reduction plan. your role as the Community Steering Committee, the role of air quality agencies, and what the SERP must contain and where to go for more resources. Next slide. So first, let's look at cumulative exposure to air pollution. At the community scale, we are concerned with cumulative exposure. And this means taking into account all the air pollution sources impacting a community. We also have to think about how much air pollution people might inhale because of where they spend time relative to where the levels of air pollution are the highest. In many communities, pollution sources are located close to neighborhoods, schools, daycare centers, retirement communities, or other places where people like children and the elderly spend time. And these are groups that may be more vulnerable to health impacts from air pollution. Next slide. So we are in the very beginning stages of a journey together that will result in a plan to improve your air quality. And to do this, we want to build a shared understanding of each key element along the path. We'll figure out how we will work together and document it all in a charter. We will generate and explore data together to make the best decisions we can with what we have. And we have to balance collecting data with taking action. And based on what we learn together, you will prioritize your concerns. Some of them will fall squarely within the jurisdiction of the Air District or Carb, and some will not. And for those that do not, we ask you to work with us to identify ways to collaborate with stakeholders or to encourage others with the necessary authority to take action. Based on the issues that you identify as priorities, we will come up with solutions. These are strategies that we know are working in other communities, as well as strategies that we create together. And we'll put all of this in the plan, and that plan is referred to as a SERP. The law calls for these plans to be developed within 1 year, but we know that if communities need more time, they should take the time. More time results in a better SERP. The Portside SERP, for example, is one of the strongest SERPs in the program, and due to COVID and district restructuring, it took 18 months to develop. Carb and the Air District are committed to working with you over an 11-year period. This time frame includes at least 1 year to write the SERP, and then 5 years to implement the strategies in the SERP, and another 5 years of continued monitoring to evaluate the progress of the SERP. Air quality does not change overnight, so this is going to be a long-term process. On the graphic in this slide, you see a path with different elements involved in the development of a SERP. And we will cover each of these elements in more detail. But first, let's talk about roles. Next slide. Okay, let's start with your role as members of the Community Steering Committee. AB 617 calls for residents, those who live and work in the community, to drive the process. Successful community emissions reduction plans and community air monitoring efforts are really the result of a collaborative, community-driven process. And the steering committee is the key mechanism to ensure community participation and leadership. In the Carb blueprint, we put forward the Community Steering Committee as the forum for the consultation to happen. That makes your role essential. You provide direction about the structure, including the leadership roles for CSC members, Community Steering Committee members. Another responsibility of the steering committee is to prioritize community air quality concerns and to identify strategies to reduce emissions and exposures. As the program elements are being developed, the community's perspective will be reflected throughout the process. In this work, the Community Steering Committee will be supported by your core team, which consists of the Air District and Carb. Now let's talk more about the roles of air quality agencies that work to improve air quality in California. Next slide. Okay, I'd like to get 3 main points across from this slide. First of all, do you remember in our Air Quality 101 discussion last month that air pollution comes from a range of different sources? Well, here you see examples of those sources at the bottom of the slide, and above them you see which agency has primary responsibility for them. The second point is that many of the environmental laws in the United States include a system of checks and balances. And one of those checks and balances is oversight. This means there are certain areas, as defined by law, that provide authority for one agency to review the actions of another. For example, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Region 9 office reviews and acts on state implementation plans developed by Carb and on certain rules and regulations developed by air districts. Carb has primary responsibility for the mobile sources that you see here on this slide. Carb also has oversight authority for the stationary sources that are the primary authority of air districts. And lastly, these agencies work cooperatively. For example, Carb, through agreements with some districts, shares the work of mobile source enforcement. We also partner with US EPA, who enforces our California truck and bus requirements on fleets that operate in California, but that are based out of state. AB 617 demands that government agencies work together. And a good example of this type of collaboration is actually currently happening in the community of Eastern Coachella Valley. Several agencies there are involved in the development of some of the actions in their SERP to help reduce pesticides, emissions, and exposures. Now let's move on to the specific roles of Carb and your local air district. Next slide. Your core community air protection team consists of both Carb and the local air district. Your Carb team consists of various staff from different divisions across our agency, who can all provide a range of expertise. Your Carb team is here tonight, and they will be here pretty much for every CSE meeting that you have. Can I have our Carb team either raise your hands or turn on your cameras just so everyone can see where you're at? This is the team that will be here to support you and the air district throughout this process. Thank you, team. As you can see on this slide, Carb writes and enforces rules on mobile sources and air toxics. We administer operating and incentive funds to air districts and also administer community air grants. And last but not least, in this process, we will review your SERP to make sure it meets the criteria in the blueprint. And then your SERP will go to our board for their approval. The San Diego Air Pollution Control District plays a huge part in this process as well. They write and enforce rules requiring controls on stationary sources. They will also administer incentive funds to be applied towards community projects that are identified in your SERP. Their team will work with you along this process, and they will write your SERP as informed by your steering committee. Your SERP will go to their board for approval as well. Next slide. Now let's go over how we will work together. We'll provide direction on committee structure, including leadership roles for CSE members. We'll partner in developing a charter. The charter will include how decisions are made and how to handle disagreements or conflict. And we'll also provide input on the selection and role of the facilitator. Next slide.
I'm sorry, it looks like I'm having problems with the document. I'm gonna try and close it and reopen it because it's not letting me advance slides. Hold on 1 second.
You might want to try closing out the inventory one, too. Okay.
Thank you.
Slide 9, I think. There you go. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
So data sources. Data sources will help guide the process to developing your SERP. This includes your lived experience. So I'll ask a question for everybody here today, and you can type this in the chat if you have time right now. What are the sources of concern or air pollution challenges in your community? This is something that you'll be thinking about during this process. Particulate matter, okay. Anything else? DPM? Order wait time, yes. Excellent. Okay, this is just the beginning. So during this process, keep thinking about your concerns and we'll work with those throughout the development of your CERT. The freeways, yep. So early on in this process, like I said, you'll be prioritizing the sources that you are most concerned with. This data will also include inventories of emissions from different types of sources and air monitoring, data that we will collect together through the community air monitoring plan. Oh, I like all the responses. That's excellent. Thank you. Keep on typing away. We'll gather all this information after the meeting. Next slide. Okay, now on to the community air monitoring plan. The purpose of community air monitoring plans is to measure air quality challenges to support action, and the criteria for these plans is detailed in Appendix E of the blueprint. And you'll see in Appendix E that there are 14 required elements of a community air monitoring plan. These elements are designed to identify the reason for conducting community air monitoring, how the monitoring will be conducted, and identifying how the data will be used to take action. Next slide. The monitoring plans can be designed to support a variety of actions, things like informing personal choices, better understanding the sources impacting the community, tracking progress of emissions reduction plans, or supporting enforcement activities. The Community Steering Committee has a vital role in determining what kind of actions the monitoring data should be designed to support. Next slide. A few slides ago, I mentioned prioritizing your concerns. And on this slide, I'll just run through some factors that support that prioritization. We need to be clear about how we make decisions together and how we handle disagreements. There also needs to be full and transparent information, and participatory budgeting is an example of this. This is an exercise that some air districts have utilized that makes the best use of the funding in a community-focused way. And lastly, time and patience. Those are key to achieve understanding with a bias for action. Next slide. Now I'll move on to types of strategies. The Air District must work with the steering committee to look at potential strategies from 6 buckets. These 6 buckets are rules, facility-specific risk reduction, air quality permitting, incentives, enforcement, and land use, transportation, and mitigation. Rules establish emissions limits or other mandatory requirements for sources in the community. Facility-specific risk reduction reduce health risk from individual facilities that impact the community. Air quality permitting ensures the cleanest technologies for new or modified sources. Incentives provide cleaner technologies. Enforcement encourages compliance of air quality rules and other policies. And land use, transportation, and mitigation measures to reduce impacts, some of which fall under city, county, public health agencies, or other governmental authorities. I'll start off by listing some examples of types of strategies that have been applied in other communities so that you can get an idea. For risk reduction, as Domingo mentioned earlier, San Diego APCD recently met a commitment in the Portside SERP to reduce the cancer risk reduction threshold for permitted facilities from 100 in a million to 10 in a million. And that applies to the entire San Diego region. Another example from the Portside SERP is seen in the subcommittees, where community members and land use and transportation agencies got together to prioritize solutions to local concerns and reduce exposure to air pollution through the enforcement of truck routes and community greening projects. Another air district, the South Coast AQMD, developed a warehouse and direct source rule. Warehouses attract a large volume of heavy duty and medium duty trucks, and the district hopes to control mobile source emissions by working with the warehouses. Community air protection incentives bring many new opportunities for funding the community identified projects, and also incentives for stationary sources. And these funds help bring accelerated reductions, often beyond regulatory requirements, but they have also been used for things such as indoor air filtration and advancing zero emission technology. So another question for all of you, if you could please type in the chat, what strategies are you interested in seeing in your SERP? And this could be anything from new rules to new incentive programs to transportation strategies. What do you think would benefit your community based on the specific air quality challenges that you're facing? Also something to think about throughout this process, right? Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. Once your SERP is complete, your CSC will vote on it, and it will go to the Air District Board. It'll also go to Carb staff, and we will review the final SERP against the criteria in the blueprint. Ensuring that the SERPs are approved by both the Air District and Carb boards builds in accountability. And remember that during this entire process, we as active partners with you in the development of your SERP will share suggestions based on what we've learned in other communities. And we will revisit this criteria later in the process, but for now, I just want to share a brief overview of what must be in the SERP for Carb to be able to approve it. Next slide.
Bear with me 1 second. I'm going to have to close this again and reopen it.
No problem. Slide 15.
Here. Whoops.
Oh.
Let me try one more time.
Oh, it's not working.
It's not letting me advance.
Okay, let me see if I can open it.
I can share.
Oh, that'd be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana.
All right.
Liliana to the rescue.
Liliana is my partner in crime here. She is also co-lead liaison for your community.
Well, I haven't rescued anything yet, so 1 sec, please. Share screen. I haven't done this on here in a while. Do I have to do a slideshow first from current slide?
Do you have the PDF?
Oh, I don't. Okay, but I think I got it. Can you see my slide?
Yes,
yeah.
It's up.
And then
slide 15.
15.
Okay,
There we go.
There we
Thank
go.
you.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so in the blueprint, Appendix C is where we have all the requirements for the community emissions reduction plans. Combined, these requirements cover community partnerships and public engagement, understanding the local air pollution challenge, identifying solutions, and tracking progress over time. And part of this process will also be identifying strategies that work in the selected communities that we can apply to other communities across the state. Next slide. Blueprint criteria is designed to understand local air pollution, to identify and implement solutions, improve air quality, and evaluate effectiveness. Next slide. All right, we're almost done. These last few slides will go over what resources are available for you. We have an online resource center available to support efforts across the state. It provides one location where community members can access tools and resources, such as monitoring data and information on emissions reduction strategies. It also has a page dedicated to online training modules to help you understand our AB 617 program. And you can access those modules whenever you need and share with other community members. We're continuously updating the materials in the Resource Center and are always interested in hearing from you on what resources you think would be most helpful. Next slide. So I mentioned at the start of this discussion that we had, or the Air District had sent out an email to you with a link to some online training videos. So this is the page right here. The link is shown on this slide. These videos provide quick introductions to AB 617 topics and the blueprint. They're short videos and they're available in both English and Spanish. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look at those, I do suggest you go through them. They're short, I think 5 to 8 minutes max, and they're very helpful, full of information. Next slide. And lastly, another available resource is our listserv. Just follow the link on this slide to sign up and receive updates of our AB 617 program. And the last slide, please. So I hope that this information proved to be valuable. I do realize that there was a lot of information to take in tonight, and you probably have some thoughts or questions. Please post in the chat or raise your hands with any questions or comments you may have. And if you don't have any questions now, or if you think of other questions after tonight's meeting, please feel free to contact us. You can always reach out to us, and our contact information will be on the last slide, which is the next slide after this. So I'll go ahead and open it up for questions and or comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And I see a hand up from Deldy. Deldy, you want to go ahead and share your comment?
Hello, everyone. I'm Deldy Reyes, and I'm the Director of the Office of Community Air Protection. I'm very happy to be with you all tonight with a wonderful team from Carb. And really just want to reinforce a couple of things. Liliana, would you mind going back to slide 9, I think it was, about governance, or that we communicated that it's not that we, Carb, would be providing direction on how you all structure yourselves. We'll be providing examples that come from other community steering committees, but it's really up to you to determine how you want to structure yourselves and identify leadership roles for yourselves. Just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Thank you for that clarification, Deldy. Do we have any comments or questions from anybody? And this information is something that, since this really delineates the process that we will follow with this community, we will be revisiting some of this information as we move on in our different monthly meetings. But I also just wanted to say, from the standpoint of the Air District, I am going to be, for the time being, your point of contact, and as well as my colleague, Melina Mesa, who's not with us today. She's in a conference, but we will be your points of contact from the Air District. I know we've been in communication already, but just reiterating it for anybody who's joining the meeting today. And we definitely look forward to working with all of you more closely. As we have mentioned in previous meetings, we will be also organizing in subcommittees just to make sure that we work more efficiently as we develop the different sections of the SERP, and we can provide examples of what other communities have done to help inform your decisions. So a lot of work for us moving forward, but very excited for all the collaboration opportunities. And I see that we, in the chat, we still are getting ideas for some of the strategies that people would like to see in the SERP. So that's great. We will definitely capture all of that input, and we will bring it back to the group as we work on those different strategies. So even if you can't think of anything right now, something for all of you to take home and think about, and always feel free to reach out to us or to share your ideas and comments during our meetings. Will membership and associated emails of the steering committee be sent out so we all know who is participating? We can definitely do that. We will be providing information via email. As you know, we share our agendas and documents in advance as well. So we can share all of that information with the group. Any other questions for Andrea?
I mean, maybe a clarifying question for me to Olga. She suggested that she started seeing dark clouds forming in the mornings that she hadn't before, and just kind of find that interesting, and then wondering if Olga would want to add to that or just to chat about it.
I do. I live in San Isidro all my life, and I live in the upper part of San Isidro, which is like in front of Smythe Avenue and the 905 freeway. But when I go down the hill in the mornings, down there where the San Isidro Clinic is, which is by or in Smythe, I've been seeing like black in the mornings, and something I never saw before. And I'm like, what's that? And I even tell the kids, and the kids, what's that? And we're like, we talk about it. I talk to the people up here, have you seen that? And people haven't seen that. And that was not there before. You would see that far away, maybe like when you're driving on the freeway to San Diego, you see those clouds like on the ocean side, but not just down the hill. And that's kind of scary to see, because that was not there. And that really concerns me.
I'm seeing some head nods even by Irma. I appreciate you sharing.
Sí, yo también he mirado esa nube, pero es como queda más abajo, está flotando la nube así y se mira negro y blanco, digo, mira todo el smog, todo lo que estamos respirando todos los días. Sí he mirado eso y es muy preocupante porque no se quita por buen ratote, no se quita, por toda la mañana está eso. Yo pienso por todas las horas del tráfico que tenemos y aquí por el 5 también. Sí, lo he mirado. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Irma. Y también les comento que pueden hacernos llegar sus quejas acerca de calidad del aire. Voy a poner en el chat información a la que ustedes pueden comunicarse con nosotros para expresar estas quejas y que nosotros podamos enviar a alguien a investigar. También sería, si es posible, si les pudiera pedir de favor, cuando lo observen, si pudieran tomar fotografías también, quizás sería una buena idea para que nos ayuden a ver exactamente lo que están viendo, para que así en el momento en que lo ven, lo puedan capturar y también que nosotros lo podamos investigar un poco más a fondo.
Claro que sí. Yo en cuanto mire, le voy a tomar una foto para tenerlo ahí.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but listening to Irma and Olga, could it also be part of the problem or something we should talk about going forward? The fact that, you know, the emissions regulations that CARB puts forward, they don't apply to vehicles or Class A trucks that are coming from Mexico, and as they're waiting in line to go back into Mexico, that sort of like excess smog is accumulating. I think, you know, incentives are going to be a strong part of a solution here to get those people that don't have to make the switch over or still have access to trucks that don't meet emission regulations and then cross into the US can make the change.
I'm sorry, Christopher, were you asking the question or was that a comment?
Yeah, it was a comment adding to what Irma and Olga were talking about.
Got it. Thank you. And we'll definitely have, you know, we'll reach out to the appropriate contacts at CARB to explore a little bit more and talk about the truck regulation, which I think is very relevant for this particular community. So perhaps there's also an opportunity to bring someone from that team to maybe do a presentation to talk a little bit about that regulation in more detail so that the community can better understand what the results, you know, what sort of results can be expected from that regulation and how it applies to the different class vehicles. So thank you for those comments.
Yeah, I think Alejandro, oh, there, go ahead. Alejandro, you probably know a little better than I do, even if I work for CARB.
I actually, that specific one, I don't know. I just assume because I think the trucks have to have a California plate to enable to do that crossing. Yeah. But I'm not sure, so I would really appreciate it, Domingo, if you could contact the right person to figure that out. And even though, yeah, I do see a lot of, you know, cars that cross regularly that are Tijuana plates or Baja California plates, I think the incentives will still create a big impact because a lot of them are California plates. So maybe even having that number of what percentage of cars that cross every day are California plates compared to Baja California plates would be useful, perhaps.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you for your comments. We will certainly look into that. And do we have any last comments or questions? I know that we're approaching the end of our meeting, but I also right now want to open it to just general questions, even if it's not on any of the items of the agenda. If there's anything that anybody wants to bring up, any comments to offer, or again, questions regarding the work that we'll be doing in the community. And I see Olga has her hand up.
Hi. So I have a question. We've been complaining about the border weights and all that. Is there a community meeting or where we as community can go ourselves to and speak about the border weights, how they're affecting our community here in San Isidro? Or you guys would be doing that, or how can, you know, start telling them?
Absolutely. Thank you, Olga. I think this is a great forum to have those sort of discussions. So we will be reaching out to the Customs and Border Protection and see if they are available to participate in our meetings as well, so that they can also hear some of the concerns from the community and at the same time be a partner in identifying any potential solutions and strategies. So we will definitely reach out to them to invite them to the meetings. So thank you for your comment.
Thanks.
All right, any last comment? I see Marisela, you have your hand up. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and share your comment.
Sí, sí. Buenas tardes a todos. Ese comentario que hizo Olga, es el mismo que yo iba a hacer. Y si habrá alguna forma de que, pues no sé, con quién tendríamos que dirigirnos para que se haga algo al respecto del tráfico en la línea, porque pues eso es lo que nos ha generado aquí mucha contaminación alrededor. Yo vivo aquí en San Isidro también Y tú puedes ver cuando estás haciendo la línea cómo está el humo por ahí. En el calor se mira el smog que sale de todos los carros. Y mismo ahí lo respiramos los que estamos haciendo la línea. También se hizo una investigación aquí de los árboles frutales que tenemos alrededor y encontraron que tienen contaminación, tienen los limones, tienen en la cáscara negro y así en las frutas que hemos investigado aquí alrededor. También eso es muy preocupante porque pues si tenemos nuestros árboles frutales y están contaminados, ¿qué pasa con todo esto? Gracias.
No, muchas gracias, Marisela, y son puntos muy importantes a considerar, como lo habían comentado. Vamos a invitar a las agencias relevantes que nos ayuden a obtener respuestas y abordar estos problemas. Así que muchas gracias. I just want to point out that I just shared on the chat the email address where you can submit your air quality complaints. So we were hearing a little bit about that smoke cloud that some community members are seeing in the morning. So please feel free to send us your complaints to this email, as well as if you happen to have any pictures, that would also be very helpful. Marisela, I see that tiene su mano levantada nuevamente. ¿Tiene otro comentario?
No, no bajé la manita.
Ah, okay, perfect. All right, so I see that we're at time. Again, I just want to thank our presenters today, our colleagues at Carb. Thank you very much for all the information. And thank you to all of our community members and all of our CSC members for being here with us tonight. We will definitely continue to having this open conversation, and we encourage you to continue to participate and contact us if you have any questions or comments. Our next meeting is scheduled for June 15. So we will see you all in about a month. But in the meantime, feel free to reach out if there's anything that we may assist you with. So thank you, everybody, and good night. Muchas gracias. Buenas noches a todos.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Gracias. Buenas noches. Adiós.
Buenas noches. Gracias.
Que descansen. Excelente presentación.
Muchas gracias, Irma. Igualmente.
Gracias a todos. Gracias por los comentarios. Bye.
Gracias, Marisela.
Gracias, excelente información. Bye.
Muchas gracias, Manuela. Buenas noches.